They stood in front of the judge and said I didn't know what I was doing, that I forgot things, that I got confused easily, that I couldn't be trusted with my own property. But what shattered me wasn't the accusation. It was the calm way they said it. Like they had rehearsed it. Like I was already gone. My name is Michael Turner. I'm 68 years old. And this is the story of how my own children tried to have me declared mentally unfit, just so they could take everything I worked my entire life to build. Before you see what happens next in my life, subscribe to this channel. And please tell me in the comments where you're watching from, your city or country. If your family ever turned against you, share your story. You'd be surprised how many of us are living the same nightmare. I didn't wake up one morning and suddenly become mentally unfit. For most of my life, I was the one everyone depended on. I worked for over 40 years in commercial construction. Steel, concrete, deadlines that didn't care if your body hurt or your hands bled. I started as a helper and retired as a project supervisor. I earned every dollar the hard way. My wife, Linda, and I lived simply. No fancy vacations. No luxury cars. Every extra cent went into savings, investments, and eventually, the house. That house wasn't just wood and brick. It was security. It was sacrifice. It was my promise to my children that they'd never struggle the way I did. I have 3 children. 2 sons and a daughter. I won't pretend I was a perfect father. I worked too much. I missed things. But I never abandoned them. Never stopped providing. Never stopped showing up when it mattered. When Linda passed away 5 years ago, something inside our family shifted. At first, they were attentive. Almost too attentive. They called every day. Dropped by unannounced. Asked questions about my bills, my will, my accounts. I told myself they were just worried about me being alone. That's what good children do. Right. Then the suggestions started. Dad, maybe you shouldn't drive anymore. Dad, you forget little things sometimes. Dad, managing property is stressful at your age. At first, I laughed it off. I paid my bills on time. I cooked my own meals. I remembered birthdays better than they did. But slowly, their concern turned into something else. Control. They started speaking for me in public. Correcting me mid-sentence. Exchanging looks when I disagreed with them. Once, at a family dinner, my oldest son joked, "Careful, Dad. You're getting senile." Everyone laughed. I didn't. The real trouble began when I refused to sign over the house. They wanted it transferred. For tax reasons. They said it would make things easier later. They promised nothing would change. I told them no. That house was in my name. I was still alive. Still capable. Still thinking clearly. That's when their tone changed. They stopped visiting as often. Calls became shorter. When they did come over, it felt like an inspection. They opened drawers. Checked documents. Took pictures of paperwork without asking. One afternoon, my daughter sat me down and said, "Dad, we're worried. You're not the same since Mom died." I asked her what she meant. She said I was stubborn. Emotional. Paranoid. Paranoid. Because I didn't want to hand over my life's work. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. Court documents. My hands shook as I read the words. Petition for guardianship and declaration of mental incapacity. Filed by my children. They were asking the court to declare me mentally unfit to manage my property and finances. I remember sitting at the kitchen table for a long time after that. The same table where I once helped them with homework. The same table where Linda and I planned our future. I wasn't confused. I wasn't delusional. But for the first time in my life, I was terrified. The hearing was scheduled for 30 days later. In that time, my children became strangers. They spoke to me like a patient. Not a father. They told neighbors I was not doing well. They arranged medical evaluations without my consent. One doctor appointment turned into 3. Then 5. Every misplaced word. Every moment of silence. Every sigh was documented. They were building a case. Against me. The day of the hearing, I walked into the courtroom alone. They walked in together. With lawyers. And when they stood up and told the judge I didn't understand what I was doing, that I was a risk to myself, that I needed supervision, I realized this wasn't about concern. It was about ownership. And they were willing to bury me alive, legally, to get it. The judge didn't look at me like a father. He looked at me like a file. A stack of papers. Medical notes. Typed accusations. And suddenly, 40 years of being Dad meant nothing compared to 3 signatures from my own children. They asked me to sit while they spoke. My eldest son went first. Calm. Confident. Like he was presenting a business proposal. He told the court I had become forgetful after my wife died. That I repeated stories. That I once misplaced my wallet and panicked. He didn't mention that I found it in his car. My daughter followed. Her voice trembled, perfectly timed. She said she was scared for me. That I didn't sleep well. That I accused people of stealing. That I was emotionally unstable. Emotionally unstable. Because I cried on my wife's birthday. Their lawyer nodded at every sentence, writing notes like my life was already decided. Then the judge turned to me. Mr. Turner, he said gently, do you understand why we're here today? I wanted to scream. Instead, I said, yes, Your Honor. My children want my house. The room went quiet. Their lawyer objected immediately, calling my statement further proof of paranoia. Paranoia. That word would follow me for months. The judge ordered an independent mental evaluation. Until then, a temporary financial guardian would oversee my assets. That guardian wasn't me. It was my eldest son. Just like that, my own bank accounts were no longer under my control. When I got home that day, the house felt different. Still the same walls. Same furniture. Same memories. But something was gone. Authority. I tried to log into my bank account that evening. Access denied? I called the bank. They politely explained that changes had been made under court supervision. I asked who authorized them. They said, your guardian. That word tasted bitter. Guardian. I wasn't a child. I wasn't lost. I wasn't broken. But legally, I was being treated like all 3. Over the next few weeks, my children became very organized. Bills were handled. Appointments were scheduled. Decisions were made for my safety. They didn't ask me anymore. They told me. One afternoon, I noticed documents missing from my desk. Deeds. Insurance papers. Old contracts. I asked my daughter where they were. She smiled and said, don't worry, Dad. We've secured everything. Secured. From me. I started keeping a notebook. Every conversation. Every comment. Every strange look. I wrote down dates. Times. Words. Because I realized something important. If they were building a case against me, I needed to build one for myself. The evaluation was scheduled at a private clinic. White walls. Soft chairs. A man in his 40s pretending to be neutral. He asked me questions. What day is it? Who is the president? Can you spell world backwards? I answered calmly. Then he asked about my children. I said, they love me. But they want my property more. He paused. That pause mattered. Later, my son told me the doctor said I was defensive. Defensive. Because I refused to hand over my life. Weeks passed. My access became more limited. I needed approval to withdraw money. I needed permission to repair my own roof. I needed supervision to sell an old car I hadn't driven in years. Neighbors started looking at me differently. Someone must have talked. Hope you're doing okay, Michael, they'd say slowly, carefully. Like I might forget my own name. One evening, I overheard my children in the kitchen. They didn't know I was standing in the hallway. "We should push for full guardianship," my son said. "He's resisting," my daughter replied. "The house value will drop if we wait," the other one added. There it was. Not concern. Not love. Timing. Property value. That night I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and realized something terrifying. If they succeeded, I could lose everything. My home. My savings. My independence. And there would be nothing I could do about it. Unless I fought back. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not the one my children suggested. A different one. A man who specialized in elder rights. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he said, "Mr. Turner, this is more common than you think." That sentence hit harder than anything else. Common. Parents stripped of dignity. Children weaponizing concern. Property disguised as protection. He told me we needed evidence. Medical records. Witnesses. A counter-evaluation. And most importantly, time. Time was not on my side. The final hearing was scheduled in 6 weeks. 6 weeks to prove I was still me. 6 weeks to show the court I wasn't confused. 6 weeks before my children could legally take my life out of my hands forever. I walked out of his office feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Purpose. They thought I was weak because I was old. They thought grief made me fragile. They forgot one thing. I built everything they wanted. And I wasn't done fighting for it. The first thing my lawyer told me was to stop reacting emotionally. "Calm wins cases," he said. "Facts win freedom." So I learned to breathe before I spoke. To pause before answering. To look steady, even when my hands wanted to shake. We requested a second, independent medical evaluation. Not the kind arranged by my children. Not the kind done in 15 minutes with trick questions. This one took hours. Memory tests. Logic problems. Financial reasoning. Long conversations about my daily routines. I didn't rush. I didn't joke. I didn't defend myself. I answered honestly. When it was over, the doctor looked at me and said, "Mr. Turner, you're grieving, not impaired." Those words felt like oxygen. But my children weren't done. They changed tactics. Instead of accusing me directly, they started creating incidents. One afternoon, my debit card didn't work at the grocery store. I stood there confused. Not because I forgot the PIN, but because the account had been temporarily frozen. Later, my son said, "See, Dad? This is exactly what we're talking about. You get flustered." Another time, the internet was disconnected. I couldn't check emails from my lawyer. Couldn't review documents. Couldn't prepare. They said it was a billing issue. It wasn't. They were isolating me. I installed a small voice recorder in my pocket. I hated that I had to do it. But I was done trusting silence. One evening, my daughter sat across from me at the kitchen table. She spoke softly. Carefully. "Dad, if you just cooperate, this will all go away," she said. "No more doctors. No more court. We'll take care of everything." I asked her what everything meant. She slid a paper toward me. A voluntary transfer agreement. House. Savings. Control. All of it. I asked her one question. "If I sign this, will you stop calling me unfit?" She didn't answer. That told me everything. At the next court session, my lawyer presented the second evaluation. The judge read silently. My children stared straight ahead. The courtroom felt different this time. Less certain. Less automatic. Then my son's lawyer stood up. He questioned the doctor's credentials. Suggested bias. Implied manipulation. He said grief can mask cognitive decline. I watched the judge's face carefully. He wasn't convinced. But he wasn't finished either. He ordered witness testimony. Neighbors. Family friends. Anyone who interacted with me regularly. My children called their witnesses first. A cousin who hadn't visited in years. A former coworker who said I was quieter than before. A neighbor who once saw me looking upset in my driveway. Upset. Because my wife died there. Then it was our turn. Mrs. Alvarez from next door testified that I helped her file her taxes last month. The hardware store owner said I negotiated prices and planned renovations clearly. My barber said I remembered conversations better than most men half my age. Small truths. But together they mattered. During a break, I went to the restroom. My son followed me in. He lowered his voice. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "You're embarrassing us." Embarrassing. Not hurting. Not betraying. Embarrassing. I looked at him and said, "You tried to bury me alive." He didn't deny it. That night, I returned home to find my bedroom door locked. They said it was a misunderstanding. I slept on the couch. The next morning, my lawyer filed an emergency motion. Elder abuse. Coercion. Financial manipulation. The word abuse changed everything. Suddenly, the court wasn't just asking if I was capable. It was asking if I was being exploited. Social services visited the house. They asked me questions privately. They asked my children questions separately. The tone shifted again. My daughter cried. My son grew defensive. The youngest stayed silent. Silence can be loud. A week later, I received a copy of my children's internal emails. Subpoenaed. They discussed timelines. Market conditions. Renovation costs. They talked about my house like I was already gone. One message ended with, "Once guardianship is finalized, we can move fast." Finalized. Like paperwork. Not a life. At the final hearing, the judge spoke slowly. He acknowledged my grief. He acknowledged my age. Then he said something I will never forget. Age is not incapacity. And concern does not justify control. He suspended temporary guardianship. Effective immediately. My accounts were restored. My decisions returned to me. My children's faces changed. Fear replaced confidence. But the judge wasn't done. He ordered a separate investigation into financial misconduct. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about accountability. Because if they could do this to me, they could do it to anyone. And I wasn't going to let them walk away clean. The house felt quieter after the judge suspended the guardianship. Not peaceful. Just exposed. My children avoided eye contact. Doors closed softly. Phones stayed glued to their hands. The confidence they once wore like armor was gone. Now they were waiting. Waiting to see how far I would take this. The investigation began quietly. Too quietly. A forensic accountant was assigned to review every transaction made while my son had temporary control. Bank statements. Transfers. Property evaluations. Contractor estimates. My lawyer warned me. This is where things get ugly. He was right. The first report showed several unauthorized withdrawals. Not large enough to scream theft at first glance, but frequent. Strategic. Money moved into an account labeled as maintenance reserves. That account belonged to my son. Then there were payments to a real estate consulting firm. No contract. No approval. No explanation. They had already been preparing to sell my home. While I was still sleeping in it, social services returned for follow-up visits. This time, they weren't gentle. They asked why my bedroom door had been locked. Why my phone service had been interrupted. Why my mail had been redirected temporarily. My daughter said it was for my safety. The social worker asked, "From what?" No one answered. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the county. Notice of potential elder financial abuse. Seeing my children's names listed under subjects of investigation made my chest tighten. Not with relief. With grief. I never wanted revenge. I wanted respect. But respect doesn't survive silence. The pressure broke my youngest son first. He came to me late one night, eyes red, voice shaking. "I didn't know it would go this far," he said. "They said it was paperwork. Just protection." I asked him why he never spoke up. He said, "Because I was scared of losing my share." That word again. Share. Like my life was a pie already being sliced. The investigation uncovered emails with a realtor, text messages discussing market timing, a draft listing agreement, dated before the first court hearing. That date mattered. It proved intent. My lawyer filed a motion to terminate all future guardianship petitions and requested sanctions. The courtroom felt different now. This time, my children sat stiff. Quiet. The judge reviewed the evidence slowly, page by page. He asked my son why money had been transferred without my consent. My son said he was managing expenses. The judge asked why there was no record of those expenses. Silence. He asked my daughter why documents were hidden from me. She said she thought it would confuse me. The judge leaned forward. "Confusion does not come from information," he said. "It comes from deception." That sentence landed like a verdict. The court ruled that no future guardianship filings could be made against me without independent court approval. My children were removed from any position of authority over my finances. And then came the part none of them expected. The judge referred the case to the district attorney for possible criminal charges. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt something lift. Not victory. Wait. At home, the tension exploded. My eldest accused me of ruining the family. My daughter cried and said I chose lawyers over love. I told them something I had practiced in my head for weeks. You didn't lose control because of the court. You lost it the moment you tried to take my dignity. That night, I slept in my bed again. Door unlocked. Phone charged. Mail untouched. The house felt like mine. But the damage lingered. Friends I hadn't heard from in months started calling again. Neighbors apologized for believing rumors. I didn't blame them. Fear spreads faster than truth. The district attorney's office contacted me for a statement. They explained the possible outcomes. Charges. Settlements. Restitution. They asked what I wanted. I thought about it for a long time. Then I said, I want them to understand what they almost took. Not just property. Identity. The DA moved forward. Negotiations began behind closed doors. My children hired their own attorneys. Suddenly, they were cautious. Polite. They offered to make things right. To return funds. To apologize privately. To keep it out of the news. My lawyer asked me if I wanted to settle. I asked him one question. If I wasn't strong enough to fight, where would I be right now? He didn't answer. I refused the quiet deal. Because quiet is how abuse survives. The charges moved ahead. Elder financial exploitation. Coercion. Attempted fraud. Watching my children sit on the other side of the courtroom was surreal. I wasn't angry. I was clear. The judge scheduled sentencing considerations and restitution hearings. And as the legal process rolled forward, I realized something important. I wasn't fighting my children anymore. I was standing up for myself. For the first time since my wife died, I felt solid. Grounded. Like I existed again. But the final decision, the one that would change everything, was still ahead. And it would force my children to face something they never planned for. Consequences. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for early winter. By then, the house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a place that had survived a storm. I woke up early that morning, made my own coffee, and sat at the same kitchen table where this nightmare had begun. The sun came through the window just the way it always had. Nothing about the room had changed. I had. In court, the room was quiet in a way I'd never felt before. Not tense. Not dramatic. Just final. The judge reviewed the findings. Unauthorized transfers. Premeditated attempts to sell my home. Coercion masked as concern. Isolation disguised as care. He spoke carefully, choosing words that couldn't be misunderstood. This court finds that Mr. Michael Turner was fully competent at all relevant times, he said, and that the actions taken against him were not protective, but exploitative. My children stood when their names were called. They looked smaller than I remembered. Not because they were weak, but because lies collapse when the truth has nowhere left to hide. The court ordered full restitution. Every dollar taken returned. Every fee reimbursed. Every expense covered. The judge then issued a permanent protective order. My children were legally barred from making any future claims over my finances or property. But he didn't stop there. He addressed them directly. You treated your father's grief as an opportunity, he said. You attempted to erase his autonomy while he was still very much alive. This court will not allow age to be used as a weapon. Criminal penalties were imposed. Not prison, but records, probation, mandatory counseling, financial oversight, consequences that follow. When the gavel came down, no one spoke. The sound echoed longer than it should have. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. They asked how I felt. I said something simple. I feel like myself again. That night, I walked through my house slowly. Room to room. Memory to memory. I touched the doorframe where I once measured my kids' height. Sat on the couch where Linda and I planned retirement. Stood by the window where I'd watched my children practice riding bikes. I didn't feel bitterness. I felt clarity. A week later, my youngest son asked to meet. Just the two of us. We sat in a quiet cafe. He apologized. Not dramatically. Not perfectly. But honestly. He said fear had made him quiet. Money had made him blind. I accepted his apology, but I set boundaries. Forgiveness doesn't mean surrender. My daughter sent a letter. Pages long. Emotional. Regretful. I read it once. Then I filed it away. Some wounds don't need reopening to heal. My eldest never reached out. And that told me everything I needed to know. I updated my will. Not out of spite. Out of intention. I named a charitable trust for elder legal defense. I ensured my medical decisions were protected by people I trusted. I made my wishes unmistakably clear. Control isn't about power. It's about peace. Months later, I stood in my backyard as spring arrived. The same tree Linda and I planted years ago had new leaves. Life hadn't stopped because of betrayal. It continued because of resilience. People ask me now what the hardest part was. It wasn't the court. It wasn't the accusations. It wasn't even the fear of losing my home. It was realizing that love doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it tests you. And sometimes it reveals who deserves to walk with you forward. I'm still 68 years old. I still forget where I put my glasses sometimes. But I remember who I am. I am not confused. I am not weak. I am not done. And to anyone listening who feels small because someone told you that you're too old, too slow, or too broken to decide your own life, hear me clearly. Age is not incapacity. Grief is not weakness. And dignity is not negotiable. Before you leave, remember this. If they try to erase you while you're still breathing, stand up. Because you are still here. And that means your story isn't over yet.